one of the things we're always talking about on our show is exits.
Yeah.
That's one of the main things of our show. We love talking about exits and M&A and helping business owners, find the gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah.
And but we've always kind of been a little more surgical, talking about different aspects, and we wanted to take some time to talk about kind of how this all starts and comes together for a business owner, and more big picture. When people come to me, usually they've already made the decision that they're going to exit, and they're either have a buyer in mind or have a plan in mind, and they're bringing me in to talk about the legal consequences of that or the legal risks. From you and your practice, you tend to, you're in the middle, but you're also at the beginning because you're talking about advising different people on business issues, investment issues. So how does this all come together? How have you seen it come together?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of two ways this happens. One, I would say the more prevalent way it happens is there's a triggering event where somebody's either upset, something happened, or they call it a day. Something triggers them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a friend of them gets sick, or they got sick, or they had a dispute with a partner, some kind of a triggering event.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is the more, the one I would prefer is the one that, years ahead, they identify that at some point they're going to exit. They're in touch with reality, and we start the planning process. And so depending on which path they come in, obviously is going to, either we're going to rush something through or we're going to take our time and optimize and try to be as efficient as possible. I mean, in both cases, we're trying to maximize the returns, right? And but really the situation itself is going to present itself in either a triggering event or careful planning ahead of time. For the folks that are working with an advisor or they have comfort working with an advisor. So what I mean by that is you have people that have been working with professional advisors their entire lives. Mm-hmm. With those folks, we tend to do planning early on because they're just accustomed to having advisors around. The other one, typically, these are folks that have been in their business for a very long time. They've just run things on their own and they're very good at it. They've never considered working with an advisor. They don't have anybody, managing their money to begin with. But something happens where they realize, I need help now. And for those people, it's, kind of drinking out of a fire hydrant at this point. And it's a little bit more chaotic. But, not that we don't like to work with folks like that, but it's a little bit more challenging because we're trying to learn as much as we can, but also we have things working against us. So for example, timing of things. They might not be ready even though they want to get out. So there are a lot of different issues. So if you kind of take a step back and you think about, okay, optimally, what are we trying to accomplish? And really there's three different buckets, I would say. Number one, the owner has to be personally ready to step away from the business. Mm-hmm. The second thing is the business has to be ready for an exit. And then the third one, which a lot of people, kind of don't really pay as much attention as they need, is timing, right? There's certain times with the economic cycle that it makes more sense than not. So if you're in that former category where you've been planning this, you have already put in place certain things that say, okay, when this environment happens, this is when we're going to start our process, right? With the latter, the one that's chaotic, it could be an exit in a really bad environment. So really, the point here is the earlier you start, the better it is. And so by the time we come to you, it's either the chaos or the well thought out plan.
Yeah. And, the coming out of the pandemic, this was kind of in terms of timing, this was kind of a perfect example of where some businesses, all of a sudden, were doing very well out of nowhere, right? If it was like a health sector related business that was really benefiting from the pandemic, if it was like a survival company where people were, buying things that they usually wouldn't buy because they were concerned about what the pandemic meant for us long term. Timing might have been great, but for other businesses, maybe like a real estate business, there was that time where real estate was really down. It would have been a tough time to to exit. And then all of a sudden it went really up, like a year ago. So, as they say, timing is everything. So that's a great point. So if you're a business owner and I'm coming to you not in a panic, and I want to start the conversation and process, what kind of questions are you asking?
Yeah. So the very first thing we want to do is we want to get to the why part, right? Mm-hmm. So if you think about, money is the how part. That's how people do the things that they need to do, whether it's spending time with family, work optional lifestyle, checking off a list of their buckets, right? Mm-hmm. The money is how you do things, but the why part's the most important part, which is, all the things the reason that they wake up and go to work every day. So understanding what they're trying to accomplish is the most important thing. That's kind of our starting point. And so if somebody comes to me and says, I'm getting a little older and I'd like to be in a position where I'm working because I want to, not because I have to. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so the conversation may go along the lines of, okay, well, let's take some chips off the table. Now, do we want to take all the chips off the table or do we want to take everything? And then we kind of go into, okay, let's assume we do this. What are you doing the next day? Yeah. How many times have you heard of business owner, they sell their business and then they drop that the next day, right? Or, within a year or so. Why? Yeah. They're bored. They don't know what to do. They get depressed. They regret selling it, mm-hmm. Whether it's to a third party or to their kids or whoever. And so that part I talked about earlier on a personal side, are you ready for this? Okay, so you want to exit, but are you really ready? Mm-hmm. And so what we really work on is to say, all right, if we have a time horizon of the next 5 years, okay, you got to figure out what you're going to do the next day, the day after you hand in the keys. Mm-hmm. And so we encourage them to plan for that, whether it's go take up a hobby, go play more golf, go fishing, go buy that vacation, whatever it is, to really make them understand and visualize, okay, it's the day after, what are you doing? And if they can't answer that question, they're not ready for a sale on the personal side. Mm-hmm. Then we move on to the business side. And, there's obviously go through a checklist of things and really trying to understand, is the business ready for a sale? Because a lot of people, they think they have a business, but what they really have is a high paying job.
Yeah,
right?
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
It's not a business. It's a high paying job. And so, think about it. What's going to happen if you're selling to a private equity and they come in, they're like, yeah, you can't really leave. You're going to work here with us for the next 3 years. So you go from being a business owner to being an employee and become miserable, right?
Yeah.
So in cases like that, what we're trying to do is work with them to try to get the business to be sellable, right? Mm-hmm. And so we work on that. And then obviously the third element that we talked about is, looking at the economic cycle. Now, these last 10 years have been crazy, right? So just when you think we were at the end of the economic cycle, mm-hmm. It just kept going and going and going. Well, where do we find ourselves now? Now we see ourselves interest rates higher than it's been in my adult life, right. Potentially going higher, who knows? And so you see the valuations have come down. People aren't paying as many multiples. There isn't as much liquidity out there. So maybe somebody missed the boat, but what we're trying to do is trying to stay on top of it. So if I got somebody right now that says, I'm thinking about exiting in the next 5 to 7 years. Okay. We could potentially wait out this economic cycle. But if you have somebody that it needs to exit right now, even if they're ready, their business is ready, they're just not going to get as much as they thought they were going to get. And so how does that tie into the why part, right? So even though you're ready, the economic cycle might not be ready. If we do sell here, do we have enough? Do we have enough at this point to meet the needs that you had, whether it's, buying that vacation home in Telluride or, right. Playing golf every day. So it's that kind of, planning that goes on with those folks that come early on.
Yeah. It's the high paying job comment was a good one. The many business owners, when they sell, they stay on with the company. It's generally, I think, a good idea to make sure things go well. But, there's the conversation when you become an employee, it's, you have the conversation, well, how many days off do you have? Well, that's like, what? Most business owners, they control their schedule. Obviously, they have work obligations nonstop. and they don't have these like, well, I'm just not gonna, take the day off. All of a sudden now it's like, well, after I sell my company, I wanted to take this trip, I wanted to do this thing, and I only have 10 paid holidays.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was talking to this firm who's in a similar space as me about a year and a half ago about a potential merger. I thought there were some things that they were doing well that, we don't offer, and we do a lot of things that they don't do. And so I thought it might make sense. So as we were talking to them, the subject came out of, okay, what's next after this? And we were talking about potential different exits that we might have down the line. And one of the comments from one of the owners there said, look, if the exit here is that we're selling to a big firm and we're going to be employees, we're not interested. We're not going to go. We're never going back to that. We're never giving up our freedom. And so there's a lot to be said about that, right? If you're this business owner that's used to calling your own shots and making your own schedule, all of a sudden to be constrained, I mean, that could have a negative impact on your health, your mental health. Yeah. Right. And so it's really important to plan this out as early as possible. Now, having said that, you could have the best plans. It might not go the way you thought it was going to go, but nevertheless, what we see is those that at least have an idea and they've been working towards it, they're a lot closer to accomplishing, even if it's not 100%, close to 100% of what they wanted versus other folks who, we've had this conversation with clients where they want to fight every single point. We're like, listen, this is as good as it's going to get. Just take it. Just take the deal and move on. Don't look back. It's just how it goes.
So what about the other scenario? Someone comes in, they have a certain life event where they're in a panic and they're just like, I need to sell this business. I need to get out of it. I don't have the ability to manage it anymore. I'm willing to take or do anything to make that happen. What kind of conversations are you having with those clients? How are you managing expectations with them and trying to get them the best deal possible?
Yeah. So number one,
outcome possible.
Yeah. Number one, don't ever try to sugarcoat it, because the biggest regrets in life or the biggest disappointments in life is when expectations and reality they don't line up. Yeah. And so the conversation starts the same way. It's to say, all right, what are we trying to accomplish on the personal side once we're out? Are you ready for this sale? And sometimes they're like, I'm not, but I have to. Okay, well, understand then, once we do this, we need to work on your personal side of things, because otherwise, while you're happy with this burden being gone, you might be miserable on this side. So let's make sure that we address this as well. Number two, the money that you're going to get, is this going to be enough to match the lifestyle that you want post-sale? And if it's not, again, talk about the realities. Again, expectation settings. So once you have that, then, you let them know, don't try to sugarcoat it. So they're going in with the expectation that, okay, these are some challenges that I'm going to have, so that, if you don't do that and you go into this deal and, through negotiations, you end up with a lot less than they expected. Now it really messes with their health, not just mental health, but physical health. You don't want to deal with that. So typically when people are coming into a panic, as I mentioned earlier, it's some kind of a triggering event. Maybe they just don't get along with their business partner, or they brought their kids into the business and now they're regretting it. Or somebody close to them had a health scare, or they passed away and they're like, you know what, this isn't worth it. I want to go enjoy the rest of my life. And so depending on why they left, if that is really something that's really bothering them or it's causing them headaches, the fact that you're relieving them of that burden a lot of times will alleviate the deficits that they're going to have and maybe not getting as much money as they have. And so really make it more about the numbers. Go to the why part and understand what's happening. Now, my experience, it's really important that you get the families involved, right? The spouse involved. If, sometimes you have these folks that the spouse is, silent on the business operations. Yeah. But think about it from the spouse's position. All of a sudden, this person who used to go to work 6 o'clock in the morning, come home 12 o'clock at night, and you just saw on the weekend, maybe, Now they're in your face every day.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've had people joke around after they retired. Oh yeah, my spouse wants me out of the house. They're tired of seeing me every day. Well, this decision is going to impact their spouse. It's going to impact their kids, right? Sometimes these, families, and, I was speaking with a gentleman this morning, and we were talking about his kid is going to homecoming, and the kid had said, "Yeah, I want to take my girl to Mastro's Steakhouse," and we were kind of laughing about it. And I said, "Does he have a job?" And so the conversation went to, maybe it's not the kid's fault. Maybe if we're providing our kids with, the fruits of our labor, right, and they're just accustomed to this life, and all of a sudden you sell this company, you don't realize, the next day you got to go to your kids and say, oh, by the way, yeah, we're not going to Mastro's anymore. We might be going to Denny's. Yeah. And how's that going to impact them? You know? And so pride comes in, right? Speaking as a father, the reason I go to work every day is for my kids, right?
Yeah. A lot of people.
Yeah. And so, you want your kids to have, you want to put your best effort out there. So you give your kids everything you have. Mm-hmm. And you don't want them to be disappointed in you, and not that they're going to be disappointed just because, there isn't as much money as you thought there was going to be, but it's a personal thing. It's an ego thing. Just like, a job, there's dignity with having a job. Right.
Right.
And so you really have to make sure when you're having these discussions where, it's this fire sale, so to speak, or, this triggering event, that you take into consideration, how's this going to impact their spouse? How's it going to impact their kids? Because ultimately, even though they got rid of that business partner who was giving them a headache, you don't want to replace that headache with, unhappy home. Yeah. Because that's probably going to kill them faster than having to deal with a stranger or a partner.
Yeah. No, yeah, absolutely. They've, people have spent a good part of their adult lives building this business and making it what it is. And then, they've run out of steam or whatever, and then but they haven't thought about the alternative. And I imagine in some scenarios, it's not maybe they need to sell the business, it's they just need to take a fresher look at themselves and their role within the business. And maybe, they should hire some people to help take the things that they don't like of their job off of their plates. And maybe that hurts the bottom line, but you're not running and selling a business that's not ready to sell. Yeah.
There's this great book that a friend of mine gave me. It was written specifically for men who are entering middle age or going from that second quarter of their life to the third quarter of their life. It's called The Seasons in a Man's Life. And, what we joke about, midlife crisis and why we act differently. Well, we change, right? As we, you think you don't change, but you really do. And so there comes a point where you kind of look at this business enterprise and you start questioning, life or what you're doing, your mission and all that. And you realize, what? Why am I taking on the administrative burden? Let me just pay somebody. I don't want to do that. I enjoy meeting clients, but I don't want to do the administrative work, as an example. And so you start, going down this path, and lo and behold, you realize, this is a means to an end. Where people that I see have a really hard time is when their business becomes their life and they can't detach themselves from the business. I tell people, don't fall in love with the business, right? It's just a means to an end. But, some people might be listening to this thing and saying, oh, what are you saying?
I'm thinking that right now.
Right? Like, are you crazy? I said, no, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because every single business, voluntarily or involuntarily, will come to an end. Yeah. Okay. Let me repeat that. Voluntarily or involuntarily, it's going to come to an end. The question is, when it does, what's left? How are you transitioning out of that? And so what I see a lot is people who they say, I think my business is worth this much, but they have, how they think they're going to sell, who they're going to sell to, they don't know. Yeah. But they assume that, somebody will buy it. And the stats, most of these businesses never sell. right? They just wind down. And if they're lucky, they're able to squeeze out as much profits over the years, and hopefully they saved, right? But the vast majority, they don't survive. And for those people thinking, oh, my kids will take over, most kids don't want to take it over. I think, what's the number? I think by the third generation, it's like 3 out of 10 that has the family business, right? Yep. I think I was talking about this on the last show. Kids, sometimes they're like, yeah, I don't care about the money. I don't want it.
Yeah. There's different interests. They don't, they just don't care to take over. It could be they see their how much you toiled and they just don't want anything to do with it.
That's exactly right. They're like, I don't want that lifestyle for me,
Yeah.
So, it's really interesting, but I will tell you this. There is no greater joy that I've seen a business owner have when they're able to take out of their business as much as they've put in. Right. Because they look back and they say, this thing allowed for my family to have this. It provided my kids an opportunity to get here. It's given me this opportunity to exit. And I had a lot of fun. And obviously the relationships that they've built over the years is really important to them. And, a lot of times they have relationships that survive the business, not just with employees, but also clients.
So let me transition from the beginning, and I'm because I want to talk to you about post closing.
Yeah.
And so what are you talking with about clients post closing? So we've closed, we found the buyer, the big payday came. Now you have to think about, okay, the IRS is going to take some. I have more cash than I've ever had before. What do I want to do with it? Not only to enjoy the fruits of my labor, but make sure it lasts, at least through my non-compete.
Yeah.
So what kind of conversations are you having with owners to help them transition into this next phase of their life? So
the good news is we're actually having this conversation before the close. Right. Okay. And so when we're going through this process, we, at some point when the lawyers are working out the terms of the deal and the price isn't being negotiated anymore, we know how much is coming in. We've already planned for it. We know exactly, here's how much is going to go to taxes. Here's how much is going to go to these different vehicles. Here's what we're going to do. So there really isn't that much discussion post other than to implement the plan that we've put in already. Yeah. The most strenuous time is that actual part between acceptance of offer and the closing date, where, they can't believe it's happening. They're in disbelief in the sense that they're like, wait, is this really happening? Am I really getting this payday? And oftentimes some people are crying because they're like, I don't want to let go of it. I know I have to let go of it. That's probably the most stressful part. But I would say the minute that check hits their bank account, the plan's being implemented. There is really not much of a conversation to be had. Now, what's going to happen is you have this great plan, and all of a sudden they're retired, and every day's a Saturday. Which day of the week do you spend most of your money? Monday through Sunday? Saturday. Friday
night, Saturday. Yeah.
So all of a sudden they go out there, even though we've planned this out, we got this budget. You get a phone call saying, hey, you know what? I want to take the family in vacation here, vacation there. Can I? Go ahead, take it. And that first third of retirement is when they're spending a lot of their money because they can, right? They're able to travel. And we actually encourage that. And the reason we encourage that is, you've probably heard the saying, if you're not flying first class, your kids are going to be flying first class with your money after you're dead, right? And so, the happiness for them really comes when they're able to do all the things that they couldn't do in their 20s, 30s, because all of a sudden they have the resources and they're happy. And so you want to encourage that. But for the most part, we have the plan in place. We also, given our experience, plan in these contingencies, right? So if we're saying, okay, we're going to keep you on a salary of $200,000 in retirement, hypothetically. Well, we know it's like hiring contractors, right? 20% supplement in how long it's going to take and cost. Always factor in these additional things because, they wake up one day, they're bored. They're like, well, I want to go here. Okay, great, do it.
I want to invest in this. I want to, all of a sudden.
It's typically not investment. It's typically they want to buy something.
Want to buy
right?
it, yeah.
Like they get this urge, and it's like kid in a candy store. They look at their bank account. They're like, wow, this is actually more money than I ever thought possible. What's funny is when you're doing the planning, they always talk about, well, I want to have so much put away for the kids, this, that, whatever. As time goes by, that becomes less important. The older the kids get, that becomes less important. But, the conversations, going back to your question, we really don't have conversations of what are we going to do with the money now, because we've already had that. That was all part of the planning process.
Well, what I will say, just to kind of highlight the importance of, like you said, of the planning process, it's not uncommon to be in the middle of a diligence or a deal or getting a purchase agreement and negotiating it, and the seller has not modeled out what their tax liability could be. They're happy with the purchase price. And I think we've talked about this before. Oh, I'm getting this much. But based on the structure of this deal and their current tax potential outcome, they're not getting what they thought they had after closing. And that's a tough pill to swallow, because they thought they were getting X and now they're getting Y, and all the plans they might have made to go on vacations or this or that is not going to necessarily come to fruition if they want to keep going forward with this sale.
Well, what you're alluding to here, so one of the way we mitigate that is, if we're planning this ahead of time, is to think about who we want to sell to, right? Yeah. Multiple different, you could sell to, it could be an employees buying it out. It could be a third party, a financial buyer, strategic buyer, who knows? But at the end of the day, what we're really focused on is what's the number we need net of taxes. And so if we're planning this ahead of time, then we could be more strategic, because you could get a different valuation depending on who you're selling to. And so it's not the top line that matters, it's the bottom line. Right. And so if we have enough time, we're going through all the scenarios and we're lining up the company to be sold to that type of a buyer. Where you run into the problem you're talking about is with the fire sales, right? Yeah. We have no choice. Here's the one buyer and off we go. We got to do the numbers, and you're going to write a check. And so there was a CPA years ago, and I had a client that was complaining about the taxes, and her response was, well, 20% plus Medicare tax is still better than ordinary income tax. So it's all about perspective, and I talked about setting the expectations, right? Everybody listening in on this, you already have a silent business partner up on liquidation, whether you like it or not. It's called the IRS. Yeah. And if you're in a state that has state income taxes, it's your state, right? So understand, think about a transaction here. You're selling the company. Okay. You're going to pay taxes. You're going to pay legal fees. You're going to pay your M&A advisor or business broker. If you have a partner, you're going to pay them, right? It's not uncommon. Somebody sells their business for $5 million with a partner, right? So $2.5 million each. You pay Uncle Sam. You pay your advisors. You pay your legal team. Maybe you might end up, who knows, maybe 60% of that $2.5 million, right? Yeah. And you're like, well, wait a minute. What happened to the $5 million sale? Well, that's what happened. Yeah. And so if you're waiting until the last minute, these are realities, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. But if you're planning ahead of time, I talked earlier about taking money out and saving early on. If you've done it right and you understand there's an exit at some point, then you've probably squeezed, money out of that company and put away. And so even if you end up getting less than what you thought, you've done okay. Yeah. You've done okay. So, it's just like, when you're talking about when should somebody go see a lawyer, it's the same thing. When should somebody go talk about selling the business? Before you think about selling the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's not, and you'd want this person, I think, also to be, like you said, upfront with you, objective. Because every, in a deal, everybody has different motivations. And things are moving fast. and you want somebody to be real with you, and I think that's incredibly important.
Information contained in this podcast and accompanying video have been derived from sources believed to be reliable. This content is not guaranteed as to its accuracy and does not purport to be a complete analysis of the topics discussed. Analysis is based on assumptions that may not come to pass. None of the content should be construed as legal or investment advice. You should consult with a qualified professional before implementing any strategies discussed. All expressions of opinion reflect the judgment of the speakers on the date the video was recorded and are subject to change.